Everybody, if you are watching this, chances are you were involved in mentoring an apprentice. This is session 2 of the recorded sessions of the mentoring support program. So what shall we talk about today? I suppose introduce myself. I think you've probably met me already, but my name is Dermot Brady. I'm Senior Lecturer in Social Work at Kingston University, and I am the lead for on-the-job learning, in other words, learning in the workplace. So what's the idea here today? By the end of the presentation, hopefully you'll have a better understanding of your role in the Social Work Apprenticeship Integrated Degree Programme, and in particular, what is mentoring? What's all that about? Have a better understanding perhaps of how mentoring can work in social care and social work, and be ready to contract with your mentee. We're not going to really talk at all very much about contracting with your apprentice or your mentee in this session, and that'll be coming up in sessions 3 and 4. So what is mentoring? Well, mentoring is around for a long time. The word mentor actually comes from the Greek. I'll say a little bit more about that in a second, but also a little acknowledgement here. We also have to watch we're not too entirely Eurocentric in our approach to teaching, learning, mentoring, coaching, supervision, management, and all these other various activities. So I've included the Sankofa bird here. Some of you will recognize this, but it's associated with education, learning, wisdom, particularly in West Africa. And it, as you can see, it's a bird reaching back. And the idea is essentially is that there's no shame or disgrace in reaching back into the past to nourish us, as it were, in the present moment. So in the Greek myth, Ulysses goes off on his travels around the world. You can read this in Homer's Odyssey if you felt like it, but I don't think that's required. And he leaves his son Telemachus, in fact, who was an apprentice himself, but it's another whole story, in the capable, or as it turns out, the not so capable hands of Mentor. Mentor was like very poor as a mentor, so the original mentor was not actually very good at it and needed the goddess of wisdom, Diana, to come and sort them out. So that's where the word mentor comes from. And if we kind of fast forward a couple of thousand years, we have guilds and apprenticeships. Some of the kind of ideas that people might more readily associate with apprentices. The idea that a person undertakes a long period of training with a person who is already very skilled in the discipline, and they sit there and watch what is done and are giving increasingly complex tasks to undertake in their journey to becoming a craftsperson, perhaps. A little bit more of it in the Industrial Revolution, keeping an eye on kind of fairly arbitrary, there's no structure to this, surprise, surprise. But in the 70s, particularly in the United States, but also in the UK from the 80s, more formalized mentoring relationships start to develop. Key textbook on this by David Clutterbuck, still around. You can get his videos online if you care to have a little look. He wrote a book called Everybody Needs a Mentor. Still in print, I think. So what is this? I mean, what do you mean? So when we say constructs, we're saying not just a definition, but what kind of, not exactly hidden, but what kind of behind the scenes meanings might there be? Colley has a kind of a slightly jaundiced take on it. He says official concepts of mentoring have shifted from dominant groupings reproducing their own power to subordinate groupings reproducing their own oppression. So are we just passing down bad stuff, things that we kind of know that we should be changing, things that perhaps in social work need to change? Well, not when it's done well. So there are a lot of meta-analyses. I just took one here. A meta-analysis is just when you get all the evidence about a thing and you see overall what does all the evidence say. And there's, some commonalities to all mentoring. It's usually a one-to-one relationship. Other kind of constellations of mentoring are available, but in the main, it's one-to-one. The mentor is usually more experienced and usually somebody in the same professional field. It tends to be an extended relationship, sometimes over years, and it focuses on the growth and the development of the individual, not just about their performance. We get a little bit worried in the apprenticeship program sometimes when the focus becomes about performance management, and in actual fact, we're about learning, not performance management. The two are not entirely exclusive, but our emphasis is always going to be on learning. It should be a confidential and protected relationships with the usual caveats that confidentiality is not an absolute. So that's what the general literature says. Lord, again, 2009, I can give you more up-to-date stuff, but the idea here is not to give a, how would I say, summary of the research evidence about mentoring, because that will take about a week. So mentoring is about growing an individual both professionally and personally. As you know yourself, you all, in one way, shape, or form, have probably assumed the professional identity of social worker and have to train. There's a lot of things you needed to know, theory, practice, how processes work, the legal underpinning, all of that kind of stuff. But you know also that it is a personal transition. You are not the same person by the time you finish your training, and you certainly are not by the time you have spent as long in practice, perhaps, as I did once upon a time. There is a link to career development, helping people along the way. And in our particular setting, we're helping the apprentice along the way through that pre-qualifying period. Usually it is an expert novice relationship. There are other versions of those kind of themes as well. But really, we are generally talking about a more experienced person working with a less experienced person. There's something here about a broader and more personal commitment. So just as the best social workers relationship based, so too is mentoring. And we'll come to some of the models that might be actually helpful for initiating, starting to develop that relationship in the early stages. You kind of think, well, mentoring, oh, it's just management, or it's just super. Well, there are very different things going on in supervision, consultation, coaching, etc., etc. There's a little link there to from supervisional to organizational learning, a typology of these various different things. And you can see in that little column there highlighted in mentorship, the aspects of mentoring that we see in social work. I'll let you, how would I say, digest that for a second or two. I mean, this is not something that you're going to be tested on, but just to try to get a sense of the kind of ethos and practice of mentoring, how it's different from other activities. So, do we have mentors in social work? Of course we do. Much more common in youth work or youth justice settings. There's quite a lot of that, even though some organizations, in this instance I've used Achievement for Children, but of course there are others, have programs try to develop mentoring and indeed coaching. It's also quite well known in nursing. A lot of you are kind of going to be working in adult social care, and you'll come across a lot of health professionals, and mentoring is kind of well established in those settings. We get it in education, etc., etc. There's a little link there that you can test it out, see what's at the other side of the link. You will receive these slides as a PDF as well as this recorded presentation. The evidence is kind of partial, so we're always kind of in a situation. Our best guess is about what works and so on. But I kind of think we're pretty close to having a good understanding of what mentoring is. The effective services is from Northern Ireland, as it happens, and I kind of think it's a good overview of where mentoring is in social work at the present moment. And in actual fact, I could probably just send that out as a PDF also because it's very short. What we will do is support you, details of this program, how you can access materials, some straightforward information about mentoring like this, but we'll also move on to what do you actually do, detailed guidance for all of the activities that are involved in on-the-job learning. You can obviously have the timetable, assignment schedule, things of that nature. You can get templates for all the relevant documents. My suggestion is ask your apprentice to do that. This is not what they like called spoon feeding. I suppose we don't like the phrase spoon feeding because it seems somehow to be infantilizing. We know the apprentices, of course, have to be responsible for their own learning, and it's probably better and easier that they bring the templates to you for the various documents to be completed. That has the distinct advantage that the templates will be current and up to date. We'll do regular online sessions. You can drop into those as and when you choose. And of course, there'll be recorded materials like this. So we have a general expectation with the apprentices of learning and developing the program together. We also have another set of processes where we work with employers to do that. We will seek your feedback on an annual basis. And if there are things that we're not getting right, excuse me, please tell us. There's my contact details. That's my phone, my email, so on and so forth. And in actual fact, hilariously enough, the email has changed. So there you go. Live changing of the slides. So what do mentors do? That's really, at the end of the day, probably what most of you are interested in. At its best, you can see here's Garvey and Aldred. Not that it makes any difference, really, who said this. But it seems to arise naturally as one person communicates interest and care for the well-being and the development of the other. And the mentor is kind of like on side with that person, but also that the mentee, or the apprentice in this instance, values the mentor's knowledge, experience, and outlook. Didn't do a very good job of reading that, but I can tell you, having had 3 years worth of apprentices now, that they certainly do value the mentor's input, that their success is strongly linked to the support that they get from mentors. Again, you have to have some sort of sense of where you're going, as professional development. Now, you were already at the end stage of the professional development. You're a qualified social worker, after all. So you have kind of some idea what the roadmap might look like. And also, I'm guessing really that you have a very clear idea that that's quite individual and different for each person, for each learner. So really what we need here, that the mentor doesn't see their protege or their mentee or their apprentice as a threat, because it can happen sometimes in learning relationships, but also that the apprentice is willing and able to hear and accept observations and criticisms about their practice that perhaps are on occasion difficult to hear, but that they will take that in the spirit that it was intended, i.e. professional development and growth. So that's the kind of idealized relationship we have. And of course, the program is really quite complicated series of apprentices. The apprentice is there at the top of this little diagram. The sub-regional assessor is the person who has ultimate responsibility for assessing and writing up the final reports of progress for on-the-job learning, and is also acting as the university tutor. So they have a pastoral and assessment role. Indeed, so do the mentors. Do you know what? I'm going to stop now because I'm not really doing a very good fucking job of this, and I'm kind of a bit like, kind of thinking, bollocks.